I can smell it. The smoke. The flesh burning. My flesh. And the worst part? I know exactly how it felt to die. 500 years ago. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a 32-year-old accountant from Boston, and I remember being burned alive in France in 1431. I remember being Joan of Arc. It started 6 months ago. Not with dreams, with smells. I'd be walking to work, sipping my coffee, and suddenly, smoke. Thick, acrid smoke that wasn't there. My coworkers couldn't smell it. My boyfriend couldn't smell it. But to me, it was suffocating. It would hit me without warning, on the subway, in meetings, while brushing my teeth. The smell of burning wood, burning cloth, burning skin. I'd gag, cover my mouth, look around desperately for the source. But there was nothing. Just me, drowning in phantom smoke from a fire that happened 6 centuries ago. Then came the sounds. Voices shouting in French, a language I never studied, never spoke. I got a C- in high school Spanish. Languages aren't my thing. But somehow, I understood every word. Hérétique, they screamed. Sorcière. Heretic. Witch. The words would echo in my head during my morning commute, while I was reviewing spreadsheets, while I was trying to sleep. Sometimes just whispers. Sometimes screams. Always in medieval French. Always crystal clear. I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into work, into my relationship, into anything that felt normal and real. I went to the gym more. I said yes to every social invitation. I watched mindless television until 2 a.m., anything to keep my brain occupied to drown out the voices. But the memories, because that's what they were, memories, they grew stronger every day. They had weight. They had texture. They had the undeniable quality of something I had lived through, not imagined. The first full memory hit me during a meeting. We were discussing third quarter projections when suddenly I wasn't in the conference room anymore. The fluorescent lights, the whiteboard covered in graphs, my coworkers, faces, all of it dissolved like mist. I was 17 years old, standing in a field outside Domremy. The year was 1425. I was watching sheep, my father's sheep, and the sky. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of blue you never see in modern cities, unpolluted and eternal. I could feel the rough wool of my dress against my skin. I could feel the sun on my face, warm and bright. I could smell the grass, the earth, the sheep. Every sensation was more real than the conference room had been. And then I heard them. The voices. Not the angry mob voices that would come later. These were different. Divine. Impossible. Saint Michael. Saint Catherine. Saint Margaret. They spoke to me in light and sound, in ways that transcend language. Imagine hearing music that's also words, seeing colors that communicate meaning. They told me things a peasant girl had no business knowing. Things about the kingdom, about the war with England, about the true king who waited in hiding. They told me I had a purpose, a mission that would change history. They told me I would save France. The voices were terrifying and beautiful at the same time. I wanted to run. I wanted to kneel. I wanted to cry. I did all three. I fell to my knees in that field, tears streaming down my face, sheep bleating around me, and I knew that my life would never be ordinary again. That I was marked for something impossible. I blinked. Tears were streaming down my face. The conference room swam back into focus. I had no idea how long I'd been gone. My boss, Michael, was snapping his fingers in front of my face, his expression somewhere between concerned and irritated. Sarah, are you okay? You've been staring at the wall for 5 minutes. I could barely speak. My throat was tight. I need to go home. Are you sick? Do you need someone to drive you? I shook my head and grabbed my purse, mumbled something about a migraine, and fled. I made it to my car before I started sobbing. Great, heaving sobs that hurt my chest, because I hadn't just remembered a moment from Joan's life. I had been her. I had felt what she felt, known what she knew. For those few minutes, Sarah Mitchell didn't exist. There was only Jean. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was her. I was me. The memories weren't coming to me. I was remembering them, the way you remember your own childhood. Because they were my childhood. A childhood lived 5 centuries ago in a country I'd never visited, speaking a language I'd never learned, living a life that ended in flames before my 20th birthday. Over the next few weeks, the memories came in floods. Not in order, never in order. They hit me in fragments, puzzle pieces of a life I'd lived and lost. I'd be pouring cereal and suddenly remember the taste of hard bread and weak beer. Breakfast for a medieval peasant. I'd be taking a shower and remember bathing in a wooden tub, the water already cold, my mother scrubbing my back too hard. I'd be falling asleep and suddenly be wide awake, remembering sleeping on straw, the prickling discomfort of it, the sounds of my family breathing in the darkness of our one-room home. I remembered my father, Jacques, his calloused hands, his rough voice, the way he looked at me after I told him about the voices, with fear and anger, and something that might have been shame. He thought I was mad. Or, worse, possessed. He told me to stop telling people about my visions. To be normal. To marry and have babies and tend house like a proper girl. I remembered my mother, Isabel. Softer than my father, but no less afraid. She braided my hair every morning. Her hands were always gentle, even when she was angry with me. She cried when I cut my hair. She cried harder when I left. I remembered the weight of armor. 40 pounds of steel pressing down on shoulders that had never carried more than water buckets. The first time the armorer fitted me in Vaucouleurs, I could barely stand. My legs shook. My back screamed. But I learned. I had to learn. I remembered the smell of metal and oil. The way the plates clicked and shifted with every movement. The way it made me sweat even in winter. The way it both protected me and trapped me. I remembered how it felt the first time I put it on and looked at myself in a polished shield, the way it transformed me from Jean, the peasant girl, to Joan, the warrior. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. I looked like someone who could command an army. But I also looked like a freak. A girl in men's armor. An abomination, they called me. A woman who dared to dress as a man, to fight as a man, to claim authority no woman should have. I remembered my voices, telling me to cut my hair, to dress as a man, not because God cared about fashion, but because a girl in a dress couldn't command an army, couldn't ride into battle, couldn't be taken seriously by men who thought women belonged in kitchens and bedchambers. The voices were practical, even when they were divine, so I cut it. I felt every snip of those scissors, as if it were happening right now, in my Boston bathroom 600 years later. The weight of my hair falling away, the shock of cold air on my neck, my mother's gasp, my father's roar of outrage. "You look like a boy, like a demon. This is madness, Jan." But the voices were clear. This is your path. This is who you must be. I found myself standing in my bathroom at 2 a.m. with scissors, about to cut my own hair before I even realized what I was doing. The compulsion was overwhelming. My hand moved on its own, lifting a section of hair, bringing the blades close. I could feel the memory so strongly, the liberation of it, the rightness of it. Sarah's long brown hair would fall just like Jean's had. I stopped myself. Barely. My hand was shaking so badly I dropped the scissors in the sink. I gripped the counter and stared at my reflection. Who was I? Sarah or Jeanne? Modern woman or medieval warrior? I didn't know anymore. But the memories kept coming, relentless as a tide. I remembered the journey to Chinon. 11 days through enemy territory to reach the Dauphin. 11 days of riding until my thighs were raw and bleeding, sleeping in forests, eating whatever we could find. My companions were soldiers. Men who thought I was crazy but followed me anyway because something about me compelled them. Jean de Metz, Bertrand de Poulengue. They believed when no one else did. I remembered arriving at Chinon Castle, exhausted and terrified. The great hall with its soaring ceilings and hundreds of candles. The courtiers in their fine clothes, looking at me like I was a curiosity, a joke, a peasant girl who claimed to hear God. I remembered the first time I met the Dauphin, Charles, the uncrowned king. They tried to trick me, hiding him among his courtiers, testing whether my visions were real. They put someone else on the throne, dressed in royal clothes. They thought I'd be fooled. But I knew him instantly. The voices showed me. I could see the light around him, invisible to everyone else. I walked right past the impostor on the throne, didn't even glance at him, and went straight to Charles, who stood in the back, dressed like any other nobleman, trying to look insignificant. I knelt before him. He looked down at me, confused, frightened. "Gentle Dauphin," I said, and I could feel those words in my mouth now, in Sarah's mouth, in this Boston apartment 500 years later. My accent was thick, my voice rough from the journey. "God sends me to tell you that you shall be the true King of France and Lieutenant of the King of Heaven." The room went silent. Everyone stared. Charles's face went white. "How do you know who I am?" he whispered. My voices told me, and they tell me other things too. Private things, things only you know. I leaned close and whispered something to him, something I can't remember now, something that was meant only for him. But whatever it was, it changed his face. The fear remained, but now there was hope too. Desperate, fragile hope. He was terrified of me. They all were. But they needed me. France was dying. The English controlled half the country. The true king couldn't even be crowned because Reims, the coronation city, was in enemy hands. They were losing. They had nothing left to lose by trusting a peasant girl who claimed to hear saints. I remembered the testing that came after. Weeks of it. Theologians interrogating me, trying to catch me in heresy. They asked me about my voices, my visions, my faith. They examined me to verify I was a virgin, because a virgin had power, purity, divine favor. I submitted to it all. What choice did I have? I remembered the sword. They made such a fuss about the sword. I told them where to find it. Buried behind the altar in the church of Sainte Catherine de Fierbois. I'd never been to that church, but my voices told me exactly where to dig. And when they found it, marked with 5 crosses, they treated it like a miracle. Maybe it was, but I barely used it. The sword was symbolic, ceremonial. What I carried into battle was my banner. I remembered the siege of Orléans. The weight of the banner in my hands, white, with lilies and the names of Jesus and Mary embroidered in gold. I never carried a sword into battle. People think I did, but I didn't. I told them I didn't want to kill anyone. I didn't want blood on my hands. The banner was enough. The symbol was enough. I remembered riding toward Orléans, my banner streaming behind me, and seeing the English fortifications for the first time. Massive earthworks, wooden towers, thousands of soldiers. The city had been under siege for months. People were starving, dying. The English were so confident, they'd already carved up France in their minds, deciding who would get which territories when the city fell. But I rode in, anyway, at the head of a supply convoy, and the English didn't attack. They just watched. I think they were too shocked to move. A girl on a white horse, carrying a banner, leading soldiers like she had every right to be there. The citizens of Orléans came out to meet us. I remember their faces. They were crying, reaching out to touch me, my horse, my banner. They called me their savior. I was 17 years old, and I wanted to hide. But the voices told me to be strong, to be brave. So I lifted my banner higher and rode into the city like I wasn't scared at all. I remembered the battle for the fortification of Les Tourelles, the air thick with smoke and screams, the clash of metal on metal, the smell of blood and fear. I stood at the front, my banner held high, and I shouted encouragement to the soldiers. "Forward! In God's name, forward!" I remembered the arrows. God! I remembered the arrows. One struck me in the shoulder, between the neck and collarbone. The impact knocked me back. For a moment there was no pain, just shock. Then the burning started. Not sharp like you'd think, but burning. Invasive. wrong. Like my flesh was trying to reject this foreign object that had punched through skin and muscle. My men panicked. "She's wounded! The maid is wounded! Retreat!" But I could hear my voices through the pain. "Get up! Go back! You will take this fortress today." So I reached up, grabbed the arrow shaft. I could feel the wood rough against my palm, slick with my blood, and I pulled. It wouldn't come out. It was barbed, catching on my flesh. I pulled harder, tears streaming down my face, and finally it tore free. Blood soaked my armor. My vision swam. But I stood up, picked up my banner, and walked back to the fight. "Follow me!" I screamed, my voice raw. "In God's name, follow me!" And they did. We took Les Tourelles that day. The English broke. Orléans was saved. I was 17 years old, wounded and bleeding, and I just changed the course of history. I went to my doctor, told her I was having anxiety, maybe PTSD from something I couldn't remember. She prescribed medication, little white pills that were supposed to make the memories stop. They didn't help. You can't medicate away memories that aren't from this life. You can't pill away the feeling of an arrow in your shoulder from 1429. I started researching. Late nights hunched over my laptop, searching for anything about Joan of Arc. I started with Wikipedia, moved to academic papers, then to medieval manuscripts translated into English. I read everything. Trial transcripts, contemporary accounts, letters written by people who knew her. Who knew me? Every detail I remembered checked out. The layout of Orléans. I could describe streets I'd never walked down. The politics of the French court. I knew things about Charles's advisors, his mother-in-law Yolande of Aragon, the various factions vying for power. The specific charges brought against me at my trial, 70 charges, each one as absurd and terrifying as I remembered. Things I had no way of knowing. Things I'd never studied or read about before these memories started. Things that weren't in the popular history books or movies. I knew what Chinon Castle smelled like. Damp stone and candle wax, and bodies that bathed once a month if that. I knew what armor sounded like when you walked, the constant clicking and creaking. I knew the taste of campaign food, hard bread, salted meat, wine that was more vinegar than alcohol. I knew the terror of sleeping in enemy territory, starting awake at every sound, hand on my sword that I never used. My boyfriend Derek thought I was losing my mind. I'd wake up screaming from dreams of burning. I'd start speaking in French, medieval French that I shouldn't know, in my sleep. I'd go days barely eating, lost in memories that felt more real than the present. Sarah, you need help. Real help. You're talking about being a medieval saint like it's something that actually happened to you. Because it did. Derek, I can describe the inside of Chinon Castle. I can tell you what the Dauphin looked like. Skinny, weak chin, nervous eyes, hunched shoulders like he was trying to make himself smaller. I can tell you how he walked, the sound of his voice. I've never been to France. I failed high school French. How do I know these things? I don't know, but this isn't normal. People don't remember past lives. This isn't real. It's real to me. It's more real than this. Sometimes I forget which life is which. Sometimes I wake up and I'm surprised I'm not in a military camp. I reach for armor that isn't there. I listen for my voices. Do you hear them now? The voices? I hesitated. Sometimes. Not like before. Quieter. But yes. He left 2 weeks later, packed his stuff while I was at work, left a note saying he loved me but couldn't watch me disappear into delusion. He wasn't cruel about it. He was scared. I don't blame him. After he left, the memories got worse. Or maybe I just stopped fighting them. The memories I avoided most were the ones at the end. I knew they were there, waiting, like a wound I wasn't ready to touch. But memory doesn't care about readiness. Memory takes what it wants. It was a Tuesday. I was making dinner. Pasta. Something simple. The pot of boiling water on the stove. Steam rising in clouds. I was stirring the noodles, thinking about nothing in particular, when the steam shifted, and suddenly it wasn't steam anymore. It was smoke. And suddenly I was in a cell. The cell in Rouen, cold stone walls weeping with moisture. Iron chains around my ankles, heavy enough that I couldn't take more than shuffling steps. The chains had rubbed my skin raw weeks ago. Now there were permanent sores, infected and oozing. I was 19 years old, and I'd been a prisoner for months. The trial. God, the trial. It wasn't one trial, but many. Day after day of interrogation. 70 charges of heresy, witchcraft, and dressing like a man. Bishop Pierre Cauchon presiding, his face cold and certain. He'd already decided I was guilty. The trial was just theater. They cared so much about the clothes. It became an obsession. Why do you persist in wearing men's clothing? Is this not an abomination before God? Because you'll rape me if I don't, I thought, but couldn't say. Because I'm kept in a cell with English soldiers who look at me with hunger. Because every time I wear a dress, they try to touch me. Because the only thing keeping me safe is these clothes that make them think of me as something other than a woman they can assault. Because this is the only armor I have left. My voices commanded it, I said instead. Over and over. The same answer to the same question. Your voices? These voices you claim are saints? How do you know they aren't demons? How do you know you haven't been deceived by the devil himself? Because I know. The way you know the sun from the moon. They speak with divine light. Describe them. What do they look like? I cannot. They are beyond description. Light and sound and knowing. That sounds like devilry to me. Round and round we went. They tried to trap me with theology. Lucky for me, I'd never had much education. I couldn't be caught in sophisticated theological errors because I didn't know sophisticated theology. I just knew what my voices told me. I just knew what felt true. They wanted me to recant. To say the voices were demons, that I'd been deceived, that everything I'd done was sin and sorcery. They promised if I confessed, if I wore a dress and admitted my errors, they'd imprison me for life instead of executing me. Life in prison. Chained in the dark forever. Never seeing the sky again. Never feeling the sun, but alive. I was so tired. So broken. My body hurt constantly. I was starving. They gave me just enough food to keep me alive, but always weak. I was terrified. The voices had gone quiet. I prayed and heard nothing. I was alone. So I signed the confession. I said what they wanted to hear. That I'd been wrong. That my voices were false. That I'd sinned by dressing as a man and claiming divine guidance. They were so pleased. They commuted my sentence to life imprisonment. They gave me a dress to wear. I came back to myself on the kitchen floor, the pot boiling over, water hissing on the stove, the smoke alarm screaming. I was sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Because I remembered what came after. The memory I'd been running from for 6 months. They put me in a dress. Put me in a cell with soldiers who'd been eyeing me for months. Left me alone with them. And just as I'd feared, just as I'd known, they came for me that night. I fought. God, I fought. But I was weak from months of imprisonment. I was chained. There were multiple men. I grabbed the only thing I could to protect myself. The men's clothes they'd left in the cell, either by accident or as a trap. I put them back on because they were armor, because they were safety, because I had nothing else. That's all they needed. The next morning, Bishop Cauchon came to my cell. He saw me in men's clothing again. His smile was triumphant. She's relapsed, he announced to his tribunal. She's returned to her heretical ways. She's like a dog returning to its vomit. I tried to explain. I tried to tell them why, but they didn't want to hear it. I wore these clothes to protect myself from your soldiers who tried to force themselves on me. Lies. Heresy. You cannot help yourself. The devil has too strong a hold. The sentence was death. Burning at the stake. The punishment for relapsed heretics. I was 19 years old, and my life was over. I can't avoid it anymore. The memory that's been burning at the edges of my consciousness for 6 months. The one that wakes me up screaming. The one I feel in my bones. May 30th, 1431. Early morning. They came for me. I'd been given communion that morning. Father Martin, one of the few who seemed to pity me, heard my confession and gave me the Eucharist. I was grateful for that. At least I would die in a state of grace. They led me from my cell. I could barely walk. The chains had wounded me, but also fear had turned my legs to water. Every step toward the cart that would carry me felt impossible. I was so scared. I'd faced armies without fear, but this was different. In battle, death comes fast. An arrow, a sword, done. This was going to be slow, deliberate, tortured. I'd been brave because my voices told me I would survive, that God had a plan, that I would see Charles crowned king at Reims, and then I could go home to my village and live a quiet life. But we had reached Reims. Charles had been crowned. I'd completed my mission. And now, the voices were silent. Why had they abandoned me? What had I done wrong? They led me through the streets of Rouen to the old market square. I could hear the crowd before I could see them. Thousands of people. Some were crying. These broke my heart most. Some were jeering. These I could ignore. Most were just curious, wanting to see the witch burn, wanting to witness history. I wore a long white robe they'd given me. It was supposed to represent penance. It felt like a shroud. The pyre was tall, deliberately, cruelly tall. Normal execution pyres were built low, so the smoke would kill you quickly, mercifully, before the flames reached you. But they'd built mine tall, with the platform I'd stand on raised high above the crowd, so everyone could see. So I'd breathe clean air while I burned, so I'd feel every second of it. I saw the stake in the center, the chains waiting for me. This was real. This was happening. My legs gave out. The guards had to half carry me up the ladder to the platform. "Please," I whispered. "Please, I'm scared. Please don't do this." No one answered. They chained me to the stake. The wood was rough against my back through the thin robe. The chains were cold. They crossed over my chest and around my waist and legs. I couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't do anything but stand and wait. I asked for a cross. I needed to see Christ while I died. An English soldier, one of the enemy, took pity on me. He grabbed 2 sticks and tied them together in a rough cross and handed it to me. His hands were shaking. I held it against my chest with both hands, the only thing I could still move. The executioner climbed up beside me. He was an old man, and his face was gray with horror at what he was being asked to do. He leaned close and whispered, "I'm sorry. God forgive me. I'll try to make it quick." But he couldn't. The pyre was too tall. The flames would take too long to reach me. There was no quick way to die. They lit the fire at multiple points around the base. I heard the crackling, smelled the smoke, watched the flames begin to climb. You want to know what it feels like to burn alive? Your body tries to pull away, every instinct screaming to run, but you can't move. The chains hold you in place. The smoke chokes you first. That's supposed to be a mercy. But because the pyre was so tall, I could still breathe clean air. The smoke just made my eyes water and my throat burn. The heat comes before the flames. The air itself becomes an oven. Your skin starts to hurt before anything touches you. You sweat, and then the sweat evaporates immediately. Your lungs feel like you're breathing fire even though you're not. Not yet. Then the flames reach you. The pain is... There are no words. Pain doesn't cover it. Every nerve in your body screaming at once. Your skin bubbles and splits. The fat underneath melts. Your hair catches fire and the smell is horrific. You can't think. Can't do anything but scream. I screamed for Jesus. Jesus! Jesus, help me! For Mary. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for me. For my voices to come back. Please, please. I did what you asked. Why have you left me? The crowd was screaming too. Some were horrified by what they were witnessing. Some threw stones, wanting me to die faster. Some just screamed because humans scream when they watch someone burn. My voice gave out. Couldn't scream anymore, could barely breathe. The smoke had finally gotten thick enough. My lungs were seared. I couldn't get air. I kept my eyes on the cross, the makeshift cross from an enemy soldier who'd taken pity. I held it against my chest, even as my hands were burning, flesh melting off bones. And then, finally, through the smoke and the pain and the horror, I heard them. My voices. Faint, but there. Be brave. Your suffering is almost over. Paradise waits. And then, finally, I died. I was 19 years old. I remember the exact moment my consciousness left that body. The moment the pain stopped. The moment I was suddenly above the pyre, looking down at the burning girl chained to the stake. That's not me anymore, I thought. I'm free. And then there was darkness. Not frightening. Peaceful. Warm. The kind of darkness you sink into gratefully after pain. And then, somehow, impossibly, I woke up. But not in the 15th century. Not in France. Not as Jeanne. I woke up as Sarah. In Boston. In 1992. A new life. A new body. No memory of the old one. Until 6 months ago. I told my therapist everything. She sat across from me, pen poised over her notepad, face carefully neutral. And you believe this truly happened? That you were Joan of Arc? I don't believe it. I know it. The same way you know your own name. Would you believe me if I told you everything I remember has been verified? Historical details no one outside of medieval scholars would know. Things that weren't even in the popular history books. Things I had to dig through academic papers to confirm. What do you want from me, Sarah? I want to know why. Why do I remember? Why me? Was it random? Did every person who died remember their past lives for 6 months, and I'm just now experiencing it? Or is there a reason? A purpose? What do you think? I think maybe I needed to know. Joan died believing she'd failed, believing her voices had abandoned her, believing her mission was incomplete. She died in terror and agony thinking God had forsaken her. And now I know different. I know what happened after. How she was declared innocent 25 years later. How they overturned the conviction. How she became a saint 500 years later. How she became a symbol of courage, of faith, of resistance against impossible odds. Peasant girls in France still pray to her. Women soldiers still look to her as inspiration. Does that help? I thought about it. Yes, because the worst part of dying wasn't the pain. It was the feeling that it was all for nothing, that I'd been deceived, that God had used me and thrown me away. But it wasn't for nothing. We changed the world. France exists as a nation because of what she did. What I did. So you have closure? I don't know. Maybe. I don't have all the answers. I've been to psychics who told me I was a crystal child, or an indigo soul, or some other new age nonsense. I've been to past life regression therapists who put me under hypnosis and led me through guided meditations. I've been to historians who were fascinated by the details I knew, but skeptical of the source. I've been to priests who told me either I was blessed with sacred knowledge or cursed by demons, depending on their theology. Everyone has theories. No one has proof. And maybe there isn't any. Maybe some things you just have to accept on faith. What I do know is this. Joan of Arc, Jeanne d'Arc, died believing she'd failed. Believing her voices had abandoned her. Believing her mission was incomplete. She died in terror, in agony, in doubt. But she was wrong about all of it. She was declared innocent in 1456. Pope Calixtus III overturned the conviction, declared the trial corrupt, pronounced her a martyr. They burned the records of her trial. Well, tried to. Copies survived. She was beatified in 1909, made a saint in 1920, 500 years after her death, the Catholic Church officially declared her blessed, holy, divinely guided. She became a symbol of France, of courage, of resistance, of what one person can do when they believe in something larger than themselves. Artists painted her. Playwrights wrote about her. Countries rallied around her memory. She's the patron saint of France, of soldiers, of prisoners, of people who are mocked for their faith. Maybe that's why I remember. Maybe some part of me, some soul that traveled from Jean to Sarah, needed to know that it wasn't all for nothing, that the scared 19-year-old girl who died in flames actually changed the world. Or maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe this is all delusion, mental illness, trauma manifesting in a very specific historical fixation. Maybe I read too much, watched too many movies, and my brain created this elaborate story to cope with something I can't name. But I don't think so. Because sometimes, on quiet mornings when I'm alone, I still hear them, the voices, faint, like an echo across centuries, like a radio station that's mostly static but occasionally comes through clear. And they tell me the same thing they told a peasant girl in France 600 years ago. Be brave. Have faith. Your purpose is not yet complete. I don't know what that means. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm an accountant in Boston, not a warrior saint. I don't have armies to lead or kings to crown. I live a quiet, ordinary life. But the voices tell me I have work to do, that I didn't come back by accident, that Sarah and Jean are connected by more than memory. So I listen. I wait. I try to be brave. I visited the statue of Joan of Arc in New York last week, the one on Riverside Drive. I stood in front of it for a long time, looking up at her on her horse, sword raised, forever young and brave and certain. People walked past, barely glancing at it. Just another statue, just another forgotten monument. But I knew her. I was her. I remembered the weight of that armor, the terror of that battle, the agony of that death. I remembered being brave when I wanted to run, being faithful when God seemed silent, being strong when everything in me wanted to break. And standing there, looking up at myself cast in bronze, I whispered in French, medieval French that Sarah shouldn't know, but Jeanne spoke every day. Je suis prête. I am ready. For what? I don't know, but whatever comes next, whatever purpose these memories have unlocked, I'll face it the way she did. With courage. With faith. With the absolute certainty that some things are worth dying for. And maybe, just maybe, worth living for too.